Good afternoon. My name is Samuel Chiang. I'm with ARM, the IoT line of business, a very long title, but my message and information is very straightforward. Oops. As the organizer introduced, I'd like to talk to you about our IoT solution for addressing the security problem in the IoT space. It's PSA in short. So I'd like to talk to you about what is an IoT device from ARM's standpoint, the different kinds of attacks an IoT device can be exposed to, introduce to you the platform security architecture, PSA, and talk about the protection and the countermeasure that PSA provides. And finally, how can you, leverage PSA to develop secure IoT devices. This is how we look at an IoT device. It has a processing element, the CPU, hopefully an ARM processor. It needs to have a modem technology that I think our partner talked about that this morning, whether it's a cellular modem or Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc. And then there is a big block for security features. That is the focus of our talk today. Then the modem will obviously talk to the cloud, right, the internet. And then also on the cloud, you have some device management software that will manage the device. For example, you will do the device firmware updates, and also you need to authenticate the identity of the device. An important property is that the device needs to be secure. It needs to maintain the integrity of the device, and you need to be able to deploy trusted service on the device. So IoT devices are getting more and more popular, and it's everywhere around us. But we think that in terms of security, regulation, and standard, there are actually very few in the IoT space. So it's like a wild, wild west. And I think you guys are in the security space, so you must have heard of some of the security incidents. For example, a couple years ago, some American researchers, they were able to, through the cellular gateway, hack into a Jeep. Right? And they were able to reprogram the control system and then control the very important parts of an automobile, like the steering, the braking, and the transmission, while without having physical access to the vehicle. And you can think of a car as the most sophisticated, advanced IoT type of system. And I think we will hear more about this, throughout this conference. The other famous example is the Mirai bot attack. So the attackers, they took advantage of the surveillance camera and the video devices, and because they forgot to set the default password for these devices by the manufacturers. The attackers, they were not actually interested in the cameras and the videos device. They were actually interested in attacking the systems behind these devices. So they basically flooded the network with a lot of internet traffic, and the result is that in the U.S., some of the video streaming and the shopping website, they were essentially brought down by the attack. So the insight there is that the attackers sometimes they look for loopholes, vulnerability in the devices to attack the larger system behind. And if you imagine, some of the more personal devices like your pacemaker or your baby monitor, if they are being attacked, the outcome would be very, very dangerous to the user of the device. So that is the situation we are facing today, and that is why ARM introduced the, as one of the leading, player in the segment, we introduced the platform security architecture as a solution to address the security problem we're seeing in the IoT space. I would like to talk about how we arrive at PSA. It's methodology. We start by analysis. We talk to a lot of the partners, the silicon partners, the OEM partners, and actually a lot of them, they don't do security analysis today, right? They just make sure their PPA, which stand for power performance area, is suitable for their target segment. But we believe that for IoT going forward, security is not an option. You need to start by analyzing your use case and your application, basically listing the list of threats that your device can be exposed to, and what is the implication of that threats. After that, you need to do architecture. Well, actually, we did that architecture work by providing some standardized hardware and software specification. Specification standardization is good for the industry because it basically lowers the development cost for everyone in the value chain. It makes the software more scalable, be able to run across different devices. And lastly, we have an implementation so that, here are the specs. But if you want to build a system quickly, we have the reference hardware platform as well as an open firmware that you can use, today. By the way, PSA is not mandating ARM architecture. You can build PSA compliant system with any architecture. We are trying to solve the general security problem in the IoT space. That is our PSA mission. So let's talk about the principle of PSA. PSA is based on this principle of isolation. So here is an onion model. You can see that in the center is the core is the most important variable keys of your device, the root of trust keys of your device. And it should run on a secure hardware platform. I will talk about that more in later slide. On top of that, you have the trusted firmware, which we have an open source reference implementation. And beyond that, you have the trusted software. For example, TenSec, a cloud service provider, they can provide an attestation service to query the identity, the security level of the device. Another example would be device management software. Beyond that, you have the open operating system and the application that we need to presume it's insecure and can be attacked by hackers. So that is the isolation principle we adopt for PSA. So this is the kind of the three main components of PSA. I talk about the security modeling and threat modeling and security analysis. So let me zoom into the PSA architecture itself a bit more. Actually, we are here to talk about security, but it's actually very hard that we have found for security experts to agree on a consistent language and framework to discuss about security. So we spent a long time to come up with these boxes describing security. At the foundation, we have the device security model, which basically describes the use cases, how you would use a secure system, how one will get from a server here, talking to a device there and back, while managing the life cycle of the device. It is the end-to-end security story, basically. Then you need to have a secure hardware system. You need to support trusted device initialization. It's the story around device creation and factory initialization. How do you put some information onto the device so that later you can reference to the device to know that it is a valid device. Trusted boot and firmware update are two sides of the same coin. So it's basically ensuring that you have the right software running on the device. How can you verify that during the boot process? And firmware update is because software are vulnerable, as we have seen. There will be bugs in the software, so you need to patch the software. How do you, once you install in software, how can you verify that it is for that device? And more interestingly, how can you, install it and then replace the original image on the device. Firmware describes the IPC and the API mechanisms that talk across the different partitions. I will elaborate that more on later slide. And trusted functions basically are there to provide useful functions so that you can do something useful with your system, such as key generation, secure key store, and cryptographic services. So with this specification, you can drive and shape your solution. And the trusted firmware for Cortex-M is such a reference implementation that you can readily use for your own IoT device development. So let me talk about threat modeling a bit more. That's the starting point. Because IoT devices are hundreds, there are hundreds kinds of different IoT devices and applications, right? You might have an asset tracker, you might have a smart utility meter, you might have a connected camera. Their security requirements will all be different, right? So it's not one size fits all. So as a designer, you need to ask yourself the following question, right? What do I need to protect against? What is the valuable asset on your device? And what are the possible attack vectors that I am susceptible to? What are the security objectives? What are the security requirements? And finally, what solution can provide that requirements? The key is that security needs to be designed in from the start. It cannot be an option. And as we all know, no security is ever completely secure. If a hacker he has infinite amount of resource and time, he can always hack a device. But does it make sense for the hacker to do that? It's always a trade-off. So as a designer, you need to think about the cost and effort to secure your device. Similarly, you need to think about what is the value of the asset you want to protect in your device. And finally, what is the cost and effort to the hacker to do that? So basically, you want to make it uneconomical for the hacker to hack your device by putting enough protection. So here we introduce the various common attacks, communication attacks, trying to mess with the packets, the communication message packets, right, with man in the middle, weak random number generator, or code vulnerability, as we have seen. Software attacks and lightweight hardware attacks are leveraging buffer overflows, interrupts, introducing malware to the system. And by the way, these two levels of attacks are within the scope of PSA. The most advanced type of attack, which is the invasive lab attack, will involve decapping the device, trying to probe the device, trying to measure the JTAG, the bus, the clock, and control pins are beyond the scope of PSA because it's a very advanced invasive type of attack. So once you have done your analysis, it's an exercise of mapping the protection for the different threat that you have identified, right? We have talked about these three kinds of attacks, and then there's a fourth one, which is the life cycle attack. It's a scenario where the attacker tries to downgrade a code version to a version that has some bugs in it that he can exploit, or there's the case of overproduction of the device, because you weren't able to track the number of devices that you were allowed to produce in the factory. So here I'm doing a bit of marketing promotion for ARM technologies. So for each of the attack type, we have a corresponding mitigation solution from ARM. So example is for the common communication attack and the software attack, by using an ARM trust zone enabled processor, which is very common and popular today, you can mitigate a lot of the communication and software attack. But for more advanced attacks like lifecycle mitigation and secure physical attack, you probably need to put down some more, invest in more IP in a silicon design to protect against more advanced attacks. And here is another commonly used threat analysis model called a STRIDE model. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's introduced by Microsoft. So spoofing identity is basically someone trying to pretend to be the user by stealing the user ID and the password. Tampering with the data is someone unlawful trying to modify the data, impacting the integrity of the data. Repudiation is the example where someone has done something malicious to the device but erased the record so nobody noticed that there has been an attack. Elevation of privilege, right, is some unprivileged user, they elevate their user privilege level, and it could, essentially become a part of the system itself if he succeeds in that. Denial of service is what happened with the Mirai botnet attack. Is the valid user, they cannot get the services they are expected to get. Information disclosure is exposure of information to individuals who don't have the right to access information. So it's not a useful model to apply for security analysis. I would like to share with you some examples that we have done at ARM for the threat modeling and security analysis for the asset tracker, smart water meter, and network camera. And as you can see, the description on the slide, the use cases are all different. And the security consideration, again, are different across the three examples. So we have done a detailed analysis using the flow I introduced. And we have shared the result on our website. And there is an Excel file that you can download. You can reference the methodology, so you can apply to other situations like drones or other types of IoT applications. So let me walk you through an example. So here we have a utility IoT device. The first thing you need to identify is what is the asset you want to protect. So for a utility meter, it's basically the metering data, right? How much water, electricity you are consuming. The threat to that there could be multiple of them, but here we are listing remote software attack as the attack we want to mitigate against. The security objective is we need to have a strong crypto. We need to have a strong crypto in the system. The requirement for that is you need to have hardware-based key store. So you need to have a key that is provisioned into the device that can be used for the crypto encryption and decryption of the metering data. So that is the security requirement we derive from this exercise. So as you can imagine, if you apply this approach to a different IoT application, the result will be different. But we encourage partners in the industry to start adopting these threat modeling and security analysis. So we talk about the attacks, right, for IoT application. Let's talk about how you can mitigate against these attacks with PSA. So PSA is based on some kind of principle similar to the trust zone technology that you might be familiar with. As I mentioned, it's based on the principle of isolation. So on the most right-hand side, you have the root of trust keys that you provision into the device. Maybe it's an OTP or fuses, right? These are the most secure, key of your system, which can be used for other security services such as the secure boot or trusted boot. You need to make sure the software, the firmware running on a device is authenticated, and you need a way to measure that. You need to know that the software is, you're confident that it is the right software on the device. You need to have a secure hardware platform. I will touch on that a bit later. And then part of the, essential part of PSA is this secure partition manager that basically set up the non-secure and the secure partition, and also enable the IPC, the communication across the different partitions. Then the other components are the device management software that enable device to talk to the internet, your application, and your operating system. So let me introduce the different isolation techniques at hardware level. You can use an MPU, memory protection unit, in the processor to partition the memory address range so that different tasks can access different part of the memory region. So it's one kind of isolation technique. Or we see some partners, they use these two-core design, whereby they put down one core which runs the open operating system, and another core running as a closed, secure operating environment. And the third type is we believe is a more cost-effective solution, that if you take an ARM processor that supports trust zone technology, then essentially you can achieve the middle solution with one core only by the hardware-based a method to isolate secure and non-secure processing environment. Different solutions have different trade-off, right? So the capabilities are different, and the resource required to implement each one are also different. Part of the PSA hardware specification is the TBSA for VAM, which stands for Trusted Base System Architecture. It's derived from, it has a long history. It's evolved from the TBSA for A-class processors using all the smartphones today. PSA is not a new technology. We are basically collating and bringing together the best practice for designing secure devices and trying to make it more holistic and make it more packaged up. Here we are listing the different important hardware consideration and guideline for someone to put together and creating a secure hardware that can run secure processing environment. For example, you need to have fuses, cryptographic keys. You need to support trusted boot, trusted timers, version counters, high entropy source, cryptographic acceleration, secure debug. Sometimes you might need to consider DRAM protection, and you also need to consider the device lifecycle security management. Next, I would like we talk about the hardware. Let me talk about the software part. As I mentioned, we have an open source reference implementation of PSA. It's called Trusted Firmware-M. So what is it? It is a foundation software component that implements services required for a secure platform. It's a reference implementation that our partners can immediately leverage to build their own system. It supports secure function invocation. So on the next slide, I will explain how it works. It supports secure services like secure device initialization, trusted boot, and it basically, out of the box, supports PSA. We run the TFM, Trusted Firmware-M acronym, as an open source project. Currently, Linaro community initiative is helping us to manage the project. It's a BSD license, so anyone can make contribution to it, and you can use it for your own product development. So the website is listed there. It supports various kinds of RTOS, right? And I don't know if you are familiar with Mbed, but Mbed is an RTOS from ARM, so Mbed will obviously support TFM, but other RTOSes like Linaro, Zephyr, like FreeRTOS, like RTX, they all support, are in the process of supporting TFM. So let me talk about TFM in more detail in the functionality. So familiar diagram you have seen before. The green and the blue boxes are the components of TFM. So I have talked about a secure partition manager whose job is to set up the partitions you see on the diagram and also manage the isolation to keep them separate, not interfering with each other. But you still need to enable it, one partition to communicate with another partition. So also manage the IPC. The secure partition manager also supports some trusted functions. These are the most secure, the most foundation part of the trusted firmware, providing services like trusted boot, firmware update, secure debug. They form what is called the trusted compute base. The green boxes are more like security services that you can do something useful with the system. We are developing some of the secure services, and third party, they can develop their own services, and they can be added to the system. The dotted line is the isolation boundary, basically implemented by MPU type of components. So each secure partition is a unit of execution. So you can think of it just like a library of different functions. So it's basically an endpoint of IPC mechanism. So you can invoke from the left-hand side, and application software can invoke the secure services and function on the right-hand side through an API call. PSA specifies different isolation levels. So the previous diagram is level 2, in which case you basically separate the left-hand side, the non-secure environment, from the right-hand side, the secure environment. Plus, also you separate the blue box from the green box. You separate the trusted compute base from the secure functions. But for certain systems, you might need more advanced isolation. That is a level 3. For example, you might have some vendor A providing some secure functions that you don't want them to be interfering with another set of secure functions from vendor B. So you might choose to implement in this way, isolating everything. But it's again a trade-off, right? So to implement this, you need more sophisticated MPU programming, which again, there's some runtime resource will require, additional runtime resource required. So we believe that level 2 will be most prevalent, and level 1 will be used in certain situations. So here's a more detailed look at the TFM. So there will be an integration with the operating system involved, so that you can, from the application, you can through the API invoke the secure function on the secure environment. I introduced the core component of TFM, and you can see there are more boxes in the core component. So we are continuing adding more functionality to TFM core. So besides SPN and secure debug, we are adding secure crash handling support and also interrupt support, because feedback from partners is that they need to support multiple contexts. So you can have one application invoking a secure function, another higher priority application coming in, and again invoke a secure function. You need to manage that multiple context scenario. And then now we are developing and making available these secure services as part of TFM, and I will talk about their function later. In the next slide. So we have the secure storage function, which basically store types, important data types like your keys, credentials, and hash for the platform, and they are need to have a very strict access permission, and they are implemented by using isolation of the flash memory region. Audit logs are services that provide recording of the events happening on your device, so that it can protect against the repudiation attack. If someone malicious has done something, something bad to your system, you want to prevent the hacker from erasing that record. So you're basically recording, right? Who is the requester ID for the secure service, and the output from the authentication process will be part of the audit logs. The crypto are for the application to use cryptographic services like symmetric, asymmetric ciphers, hash, message authentication code, MAX, etc. So a very useful service. So currently, these are all available, together with the blue box on the trustedfirmware.org for anyone to download and prototype your system. We are in the process of adding more features to TFM. So we are developing attestation. We believe it's a very useful function, especially for real IoT application where you need to connect to the cloud. It allows the cloud provider, service provider to query the device, asking, hey, who is the manufacturer, what is the part number, if we support PSA, what is the PS level 1, 2, 3, what is the firmware version on the device, so that you can make a decision how much service you are willing to deploy to that IoT endpoint. So that is the attestation function. Provisioning is about the life cycle management from initial device creation. You might have a change of ownership of the device to by the end you might end of life the device. You need to manage that process. That's provisioning. And others are platform services and third-party services that we support for third-party vendor to add their secure services to the system. So let's look at a PSA in action. This is an example that an application that tries to set up a TLS session with the network. So it needs to set up a channel with the TLS library, right, to send a packet to the network, encrypted packet. So it will rely on the TLS secure function in the first secure partition, and that in turn depends on using the key store in another secure partition, and also they need to depend on the data sealing function in the trusted compute base, and also the crypto operation in the trusted compute base. And ultimately, it boils down to accessing the hardware resource like the cryptographic acceleration and the root of trust keys. So we have demo and example of how you can actually deploy TFM with real applications. So how do you get started, right, with PSA? I would encourage you to go to our website. You can download the threat modeling security analysis template and reference the example we have done for your own application. The specification, the TBSA VAM, and the firmware framework, next week we are going to open them. Next week is our TechCon event in San Jose. We're going to open the specification will be available for anyone to reference and study on our website. Today is under NDA only. And TFM, as I mentioned, is already hosted on trustedfirmware.org. Please download it, and then if you want to prototype your system, you can actually request for a development board from ARM, a Masca board. This is the Masca board. It has got a Cortex-M 33 processor on it, trust zone supported processor. It support PSA hardware principles. TFM will, out of the box run on the Masca board, and then you can develop your own secure services and application on top of the platform. So in summary, right, PSA provides a complete set of security deliverable. Our goal is to reduce the time to market and the cost for people wanting to play in this space by doing the pipe cleaning, plumbing work for the security basic level problems. PSA makes security easier to implement through a common architecture. We believe that standardization will, again, help scaling of IoT devices and application. Our ultimate goal is to bring security success for everyone in the industry by providing trusted devices and trusted data from these trusted devices. With that, I conclude my presentation. I'd like to thank TenSec for inviting us to participate in this great event, and I'm happy to take any question online or offline. Thank you.
Hello.